I see folks trying to get connected to audio and video. So we're going to give it a few minutes and then we will invite our leader in this space, Kimberly Alejandro, to kick us off. But we appreciate you spending your morning with us. Alrighty. I am watching the list and it looks like there's one or two more people getting fully logged in. But give it time and that passes. So Kimberly, why don't you get us started for this morning's engagement?
Thank you, Morgan. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kimberly Alejandro. I work for Pacific Core, Pacific Power, as a regulatory manager specific to clean energy planning. Very excited to have you all join us this morning for various updates, as well as some great information that our subject matter experts have prepared for you. I hope you find the session engaging and informative, and we do welcome your participation at any time, either within the chat or through discussion along the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly, and thank you all for joining us this morning. We are so excited to be able to bring this information to you all and engage with you on some of what PacifiCorp has going on and in the hopper. Why don't we jump to the next slide and get started? Awesome, thank you, Zanaya. First and foremost, I'm going to go ahead and invite my colleague Zanaya Morgan to hit the recording button. You should get an alert that pops up, but this is a recorded meeting and engagement that will be posted online for you all to use as a resource and for accessibility reasons for other folks that are not able to join to be able to reference and go and hear all of this great information that the Pacific Core team has gathered for you all today. Before jumping in, I'll let you take a look at the agenda while I go through some of the items to make sure that you have the best meeting experience possible. First and foremost, I already mentioned this is recorded, but we would also love to hear from you guys by letting us know who is in the room and using the video option while engaging in discussion. We try to make this as human as an experience as possible in this virtual world that we find ourselves living in. In order to add your organization, if that is applicable, you can feel free to hit the participants and right click and hit the rename button to add your organization. We find this really helps to break down the barriers and let people know who's in the room and how to engage with those folks. Additionally, this is both translated and interpreted. If you prefer to communicate via Spanish or ASL, you can navigate to either the interpretation icon and either select ASL under watch or Spanish under audio. And we are excited to be able to offer those options to really ensure participants are able to engage in the means that they are most comfortable doing so. I touched on using gallery view when in group discussion. We want to see your faces. I'd love to pull on some threads when I see those opportunities arise. I also referenced my colleague Zanaya Morgan, who's on the line from the facilitation team. You are able to chat her or me, anyone with the eSource name in the title, and we will work to get you fully signed into the media or meeting rather, should you have any issues. Technology issues, we try to avoid them, but every once in a while they just seem to keep popping up. But we are here to overcome those and troubleshoot them. Lastly, engagement is encouraged. That's the point of having this meeting. We're excited that you spent your morning with us today. Questions are welcome anytime. I'm going to be monitoring the chat function. I'll also be keeping an eye on raised hands, folks that are coming on camera or off mute. This is the purpose, this is the space, and I know that the SMEs or subject matter experts rather that are here on the line are really excited to hear from you. So this is the space. You see the agenda, which I know has also been shared with you all prior to this meeting, but it is a filing heavy time in this part of the world, with a lot of updates and some closing the loop items from previous engagements to share what activities are going on. As always, we are also going to end this space with a post-engagement survey. So we do always appreciate folks who are here till the end to partake in that. The only way that we can continue making these engagements better is by hearing from you guys. It is anonymously submitted to PacifiCorp, but we always encourage people where possible and we're comfortable to stay on the line and engage in that post-engagement survey to let us, the facilitation team, as well as the PacifiCorp team, know what we're doing right, what we can improve upon, and how to make these engagements the most meaningful for you all. Next slide. Holy collaborators, oh my goodness, it takes a whole lot of people to get this information to you all. So I want to give a big shout out to the people who are on this screen, but also to the teams supporting them. You'll hear from one or two people that aren't on here that are subject matter experts in a more narrow, so for instance, environmental, et cetera, but it takes a whole lot of people to get this information to you today, and want to give a big shout out to everyone here on the screen. I'm going to let them introduce themselves a little bit deeper at the kickoff of their sections, so that you can hear from them, but want to say a big thank you to everyone who was able to contribute and make this engagement possible today. Next slide. And that gets us through the kickoff or opening of the meeting. Kimberly, I would love to hand it back to you to provide some of the updates around the CEIP or the Clean Energy Implementation Plan.
Thank you, Morgan. Could we please go to the next slide? So I did want to provide an update this morning. This is specific to PacifiCorp's 2023 Biannual Clean Energy Implementation Plan update. So on November 1st, 2023, PacifiCorp filed its biannual update with the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission. On May 19th of this year, the WUTC issued Final Order 16 in docket UE 210829, rejecting PacifiCorp's update. So while the company is disappointed by the outcome of the update, we do see this as an opportunity to move forward and start over during the next planning period, which will take us through years 2026 through 2029. There have been many lessons learned from this first planning period, and we look forward to making progress over the next 4 years. Also worth noting is that this first planning period is not over until the end of 2025. And next summer, utilities will submit their first compliance report filings that will detail actual progress on interim targets and other specific actions, which will then be deliberated on by the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission, or Commission for short. Finally, the company will address proposed conditions in its 2025 CEIP, which is due to be filed October 1st of this year. and it will explain how it can or cannot adopt the conditions and any progress that has been made towards adopting them. For folks that want to dig a little deeper and review the final order, it is linked here at the bottom of the slide in front of you. All right, can we go to the next slide, please? So now on to the topic of,
Kimberly,
go
sorry
ahead.
to interject, but I did see a hand shoot up from Charlie, and I'm wondering if we could maybe address this before changing topics.
Yes,
Thank
absolutely. Go
you.
ahead.
And thanks for kicking us up on engaging, Charlie. We love you in this space.
Yeah, no problem. Good morning, everyone. My name is Charlie Thompson. I'll add my org. I'm with the Northwest Energy Coalition, based here in Seattle. I thanks for the update on the biennial CEIP. I was curious, Kimberly. Will so I saw on the previous slide that we're gonna have a chance to look at how Pacific Core is going to address the Commission's recommended conditions from the biennial CEIP. Is that going to be in this draft 2025 CEIP update? And or are we going to discuss Pacific Core's plans to address any of those conditions and in the CEIP engagement series?
Yeah, I saw Rohini shoot on camera, and I'm wondering if that's indicative of her wanting to jump in here.
If Rohini would like to jump in, absolutely welcome that. That's something I don't think we've really thought fully through, Charlie. I do realize we will be delivering a draft CEIP. So that's something for us to think about as we're walking through this process. But Rohini, do you have anything else to add here?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Kim, you've already covered it. So we will be using the 2025 CEIP as an opportunity to address the proposed conditions. For anyone who followed along with the adjudication of that case, we have thought about, pretty much all of these proposed conditions that either came from commission staff or other intervener parties throughout the process, and we've supplied some of our feedback on those in our rebuttal testimony. Our stance on most of those has not changed. We are favorable, I think, on most of them. We can start to implement most of those conditions. Some of them, we were already aware of, and so we're already thinking about what that looks like. As far as an opportunity to talk about that publicly, that I don't think we've thought through the timing. Transparently, we are like in filing, we're in our filing dungeon right now because we've got like two really big filings back to back. So once we get past, I guess, like the next 2 weeks, we will probably start lining up what our engagement looks like for the rest of the year. But those elements will be in the draft CEIP as well as the final. And so we'll make a note to try to get some of that ahead of folks. I know that at least one or two of the conditions will probably require us to be talking to our advisory group, because of some of those conditions, either around kind of minimum designations or even like tribal engagement. And so those are things that we are thinking about behind the scenes. And I think going to figure out where we can leverage our advisory groups and our members and kind of the right interested parties. So yeah, all good questions. We don't have any of that ready for you yet. We've been talking to staff as well. So it's all on our mind. And I think we'll be prepared to address pretty much nearly all of the conditions.
Okay, thanks so much, Rahini. Yeah, I did go through PAC's testimony and rebuttal testimony and kind of mark down like, oh, was agreeable to this one or might have to talk more about that one. So when we get to that point in the draft EIP or if there's other like advisory group opportunities,
Yeah.
maybe it's helpful to to kind of clearly show like these are the recommended conditions from staff and other parties, and here's exactly how we're addressing it, which it sounds like you're planning on doing. But thanks for the update, and you too, Kim.
Absolutely. We always appreciate your questions, Charlie. So thank you. Anything or anyone else, Morgan, before we move forward?
Not at this time, but I'll let you know if that changes. Thank you so much, Kim, Rohini, and Charlie.
All right. So on the topic of Pacific Core's 2025 filed public participation plan, so really just wanted to provide audience members this morning with a snapshot of this filing You will see on the right-hand side the table of contents. I always find this helpful in distinguishing the type of information that's contained within the document itself. It helps orient folks to specific areas they might be interested in. So really wanted to just highlight what's available for you. If you are a fan of public participation and are looking for information on what Pacific Power is specifically doing in Washington. At the bottom here is a link to the document. We do encourage folks to take a look at any time, and if you have thoughts on any of the information contained within, please know that you can reach out to us. We're happy to have a conversation and or just keep continuing to acquire feedback along the way. Next slide, please. So, discussing feedback, really wanted to just highlight some of the things that we've been hearing from folks. We thank everyone that's submitted items, feedback more specifically to us. We continue to collect it, include it within our feedback tracker, and ensure that we're keeping it top of mind if we're considering changes or adapting our practices, just to ensure that we are meeting the needs that currently exist. That said, we do see this as an iterative process. So over the next 2 years, we'll continue to find opportunities for folks to provide their thoughts on this topic. We do understand that needs change, and maybe we need to pivot in moments just to ensure that there's continued accessibility and inclusion. But just highlighting some of the things that we've heard. Is the information becoming readily available as soon as possible? This is something that we strive to do in moments. It's not necessarily the most possible to provide information well in advance, but we do make a concerted effort to provide information as soon as it's ready to be shared. So keeping this top of mind as we continue to provide these presentations and any updates to you all externally. Second, we did hear about the interest to hear more about tribal engagement. So really wanted to find additional opportunities to provide any relevant updates specific to efforts in Washington. This will continue to be provided in the spaces where it makes most sense to do so. And that might involve our advisory group spaces and moments. So keeping this top of mind, especially as Pacific Power does serve tribal communities. Third, we did hear that, and I think this relates to more specifically to our filing, just better descriptions of engagements and or activities that have been conducted that include our equity advisory group. So we do have a lot in our archived folders of past exercises, past conversations. So just being mindful of how we can do a better job of providing enough context for folks not necessarily familiar or previous participants to really follow along to some of the things that were heard and carried out throughout these experiences. And then finally, there was a resource provided to us to consider as we continue to provide meeting facilitation and support a meaningful feedback process. So this specifically is the spiral model of popular education, which we are taking a look at and seeing where it might fit within our processes. I'll take a pause here. Any questions? These are simply highlights, I will say, and don't capture the full extent of what feedback we have acquired.
I'm not seeing anything, but I did add the link to the Washington CETA, or otherwise known as Clean Energy Transformation Act webpage, to the chat should anybody want to check out these items that Kimberly is referencing, including the 2025 PPP.
Thank you, Morgan. That's very helpful. If we could move to the next slide, please. So quickly here, a snapshot of what's to come. Sort of shows where we've been, where we're going in terms of our key filings or deliverables this year. So we did file our 2025 CEIP Public Participation Plan on April 25th. This has been covered various times, but again, if there are any questions related to this document, feel free to reach out. Upcoming soon here is our 2025 CEIP Annual Progress Report. where 2024 actual data will be reported. This is more of an informational filing, but it is due to be submitted or filed by July 1st of 2025, which is not too far along now here. And we will be introducing preliminarily some of the data that will be included within that progress report. So very excited to have that presentation lined up for you this morning. And then finally, as Rohini alluded to a little earlier, we are working collectively internally to deliver our 2025 Clean Energy Implementation Plan, which will take us through the next 4 years or the second cycle. Very excited to continue on this process and this journey of clean energy planning. And we look forward to working with you all and engaging with you all as this develops further. Next slide, please. Okay, I think this is my last slide. So I just want to recap this segment by stating that we do encourage participation throughout this process. I know one may not be able to attend all engagement sessions, so that is why these specifically are recorded, just to add an additional layer of accessibility if folks want to reference them at a later time. So you see here today's meeting at the very top. And then key here for 2025 is our August 26th session. So by this time, we would have made readily available a draft 2025 Clean Energy Implementation Plan. So that's what we're aiming to accomplish. And during this August 26th session, which brings together both Washington advisory groups as well as other Washington interested parties, we do plan to provide time and space for folks to provide feedback, for us to have a conversation together and really dig in prior to our finalization and final filing. So more to come, and we'll make sure to relay additional communications so everyone has this in their line of awareness. For folks that want to remain tuned in, we do have an email list. So if you want to send a communication to CEIP@pacificcorp.com, we can add you to that distribution list to keep you up to date with additional information as it becomes available. And then at the very bottom here is the link to our webpage where you can find past meeting materials, additional resources, and information.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much, Kimberly. And you're right. How is it already almost July? Oh my goodness. But I'm not seeing any immediate hands raised or items in the chat, but ask and you shall receive, as always. When will the draft CEIP be filed? Big, great question there, Charlie.
I want to preliminarily say about mid-August. And if we're looking at business days, I think that's around the 15th, Charlie. So just keeping an eye on that date as the potential filing date itself. That said, we are mindful of the 45-day period. So we will ensure that at minimum we meet those 45 days and we'll file ahead of that.
And
Thank you.
am I correct to say that when it is filed and those updates, will those be communicated via the distribution list that you mentioned, Kimberly?
We can, if that would be helpful for individuals. I think that's a key communication to share.
All right. Well, wondering how do folks feel about that? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, this is Charlie. Communications about or like updates when it's going to be filed or when it has been filed would definitely be helpful. And it looks like if it's filed mid-August, we'll have about 10 days. I don't know exactly how many business days it is in between the filing or the release of the draft to this joint advisory group meeting to discuss it. I assume, is there also opportunity to continue to review and comment after this joint advisory meeting?
That is a great question. I'm inclined to say yes, leading up to the final filing. We do have our email. So if at any point after the session there is additional thoughts or feedback, we're happily accepting additional communications as they come up.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
No, and thank you for those questions and clarifications. I will add that, timing is everything. So the earlier, the better, I think, where possible to get that feedback in is always appreciated. But I know in working with Kimberly and the clean energy planning team, they want the feedback.
Thank you, Morgan. Thanks, all.
All righty, so why don't we go ahead and hand it over here? And I believe it'll be Rohini that'll be kicking off this part of the annual progress report updates.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully you can still hear me. Morning, I guess I should introduce myself. Rohini Ghosh, Director of Clean Energy Planning here at Pacific Corp. So I'm going to kick off kind of an initial piece of our progress report that is going to be filed in about a week now, and just kick off a preview, I guess, of some of our results. So for everyone's kind of recap or knowledge, each utility is required to submit an informational annual progress report every year, having started in 2023. And that annual progress report is basically a backwards look at the past year. And we report against several key requirements and also provide additional information on our actual CBIs, our customer benefit indicators. Say that 5 times fast. As well as we provide, mostly in confidential work papers, tons of information on like actual energy purchases and sales, actual generation, all those types of good things. In 2026 will actually be the first year that we don't file a progress report, but we actually make a compliance filing. And so for all the utilities, that will replace their progress report and will actually be a look back at the first 4 years. So the first CEIP planning period, 2022 through 2025. And my understanding is that will not just be informational, that will be considered a compliance filing, and the commission will actually review those reports. And I think basically say, yes, these were in compliance, or no, they were not. So these progress reports that we've been filing are kind of a lead up to that. So on this first slide, though, talking about kind of our progress towards our interim clean energy targets, there's kind of a few things I wanted to say to preface this. So first of all, I think if folks have looked at our past progress reports and they're looking at this one, they might notice some things that are changing in these tables, things that are zeros now that weren't before. I will get into that a little bit. But really what this represents is, I think, updated learning. So all of the investor-owned utilities, the IOUs that are under this same kind of requirement for CETA and our interim clean energy targets, I think as we move in time, all of us are actively updating our understanding of these rules. And I say that because my guess is by the time we go to file our compliance filing next year, we will have once again kind of come to a new understanding. And it's because of the way these rules in some ways mimic something like a renewable portfolio standard in RPS, but in other ways expand beyond a standard RPS. And so in our kind of working through these things, looking at our actual energy supply, looking at products and resources we can purchase in the future, we are, I think, still grappling with our understanding of what type of resource or product actually is CETA compliant. How do you show that CETA compliance? And so I just say that to preface kind of some changes made this year and also potentially additional changes that could be made by next year. And once we get through that first compliance period and the commission is actually weighing in on our filings and kind of making decisions, I think that will be really important in providing more clarity to the IOUs on kind of what does count and what is required to show that. And if anyone wants me to go into that in more detail, happy to. Maybe I'm talking at a very high, vague level, really I'm just kind of alluding to the fact that when we have renewable energy credits or RECs, like we typically use for an RPS standard, that is kind of our physical ticket. Well, it's not physical. It's like our ticket that says this energy was ours. We claim the attributes, therefore it contributes towards our renewable energy standard. But there are many cases in which we don't have RECs for a given product, for some energy. It doesn't always mean that energy is not considered clean or not emitting. It's just sometimes the owner of that resource doesn't register it with the authority that gives out the RECs. Sometimes there might be other reasons we don't have it, where we actually have to give those to our customers because they're paying for those RECs in a contract. So there's some different rules that can govern when we do and don't have RECs. Some of those mean we don't have the attribute, and some of those mean we do have the attribute, we just can't prove it with a REC. And so those kind of factors can confound what we report. And we've been trying to be very conservative and not over-report what we think contributes to our CETA position. There's also the additional option where one might purchase unbundled RECs. And that is also something we've been grappling with, and our understanding of what it means to use unbundled RECs or go out and purchase unbundled RECs to comply with CETA. So I say all those things, maybe that's more confusing. But just a quick overview of what's on the table here. So as Kim mentioned up front, Pacific Corp's biennial CEIP update that we filed in 2023 was rejected. And so we are basically being held to the original targets that we submitted in our 2021 CEIP. Technically the ones in our 2021 revised CEIP. So if you go back and look at the documents, unfortunately, the landscape did look quite different. The environment we were planning for, things that were happening in real time, a lot of things have changed in the market. A lot of things have changed for the company's position. There were delays in procurement at that time. And so for all the reasons we stated in our biennial CEIP update, we don't feel that those original interim targets are necessarily realistic or achievable, given kind of the time frame that we are in. And so having stated that, our original goal for 2024 was 40%. And if you look all the way to the bottom of this table, for 2024, we are sitting at about 27%. Unfortunately, that is below the target. Again, many things have changed in our environment, and things that we would not have necessarily seen coming. And we just unfortunately have not necessarily made as much progress as we had hoped. But I do want to say that there are a few things going on. So first of all, we have actually added at least 600 megawatts of system renewable resources. I think almost all of that is new wind resources. So we have brought online since the beginning of this planning period, mostly since last year and then going into next year, we are bringing on new renewable resources for this system. That is happening. That forward movement is being achieved. However, part of what is being reflected in this year's report for 2024 is while we do have these newer resource additions, we also are losing quite a bit of the existing hydro. So there are several units of existing hydroelectric that are being decommissioned, and that really shows up in this report. A lot of loss of RECs there. Additionally, we are continuing to see year after year recently just poor hydro production. So if you compare hydro actuals to our forecast, it's just less favorable. And I think wind is doing okay. It's kind of, I think we had similar production to last year, but it's not always as high as what we forecast in like an IRP setting, because the IRP is probably a little bit more favorable. So things to consider, I think, as far as what forecasting looks like versus actuals, given that climate considerations are changing and not always within our control. So those are some things that contribute to actual REC production being less than what we expected. Walking through this table just really quickly, we have this 40% at the top. That was our goal for 2024. Again, this comes from our 2021 revised CEIP that was filed in March of 2023. very much based off the 2021 integrated resource plan though. So just timing on that. We determine our obligation based on retail sales, and these are actual reported retail sales for 2024. We then adjust it by qualifying facility generation. So under PURPA, which is Kieran or someone's going to have to tell you what it stands for. Sorry, we should have put it on the slide. But it's basically the law around how qualifying facilities are treated. Basically, the utility has to take the generation from those. And so we are not obligated to kind of have those hit our compliance obligations. So we net the qualifying facility or QF generation from that. And so our final retail sales number kind of tells us our total obligation. And so we then tally up all of our CETA compliant energy, and we take that as a percentage of our QF adjusted retail sales. And that's how we get to 27%. So you see several rows of information here. The first is that, oh, thank you for sharing, Samuel. PURPA, thank you. The first row here that describes kind of our CETA compliant energy. We first have Washington allocated renewable energy with RECs, fairly self-explanatory. That's all of the renewable energy in our system that's cost allocated to Washington customers that is associated with a renewable energy credit. And so again, that must basically be renewable and or hydro that do have a REC with it. There are many cases in which we serve customers with energy where we're not entitled to the REC or it does not generate a REC. The additional line is Washington allocated Pacific Corp system RECs reported in RPS. This line is actually another set of resources where, as part of RPS that's been around much longer, we have a set of RECs that the company has long had a contract that we pay for, and that's just kind of the RECs that are, again, cost allocated to Washington. It's a small percentage, that total number. The third row, kind of in the second set, is Pacific Corp system RECs. And you'll see that this is a 0. We left this in because we had reported it in the past years. So this was a potential option for compliance that the company had been considering. These are a bunch of kind of energy and RECs that the company has from resources that we own and we generate from that no customer across any state is actually paying for. So it's actually just not cost allocated to anybody. And so we have these RECs that we are sitting on. We had considered kind of allocating those to Washington with the understanding there would need to be some kind of recovery mechanism to help pay for those and like fairly give those to Washington customers. But we have since reviewed our position, and we don't think that that is in the spirit of the law, and kind of spending additional money to get unbundled RECs for Washington customers prior to 2030, when there's not really a differentiation between sort of primary and secondary compliance. We don't think that that's really what the commission is directing us to do. And so we've removed those from this year's report, which if you're comparing to past years, is part of why it's going to look like we've actually not made progress at all. Whereas its progress is quite flat, quite frankly. So just calling that one out. The next two lines are other tranches of kind of CETA compliant energy. We have Washington allocated BPA renewable energy, and then we have Washington allocated BPA non-emitting energy. Again, I'm not the expert to kind of talk about what those are, but they are, I think, considered CETA compliant non-emitting energy resources that don't necessarily have the RECs, but are things that we count towards kind of our total supply of clean energy. And so we add all of those up to get our kind of total units of RECs or CETA compliant energy that are serving Washington retail sales, which is sitting at about 27% for 2024. And I know that Kieran or other folks from our kind of carbon policy reporting team are online. So if anyone needs to add or correct me, please do.
No correction necessary. You did great, Rohini.
Thanks. Any questions?
Why don't we give it a second before handing over the baton to Robert? but not seeing any immediately, Rohini. And thanks for the confirmation by the carbon reporting team. And see, this is why we always give it a minute. There's a hand up. Would love to hear from you, Paul. Welcome to the virtual stage.
I know, and I'm always the one that hesitates until the very last second. Could you go back just one more slide? I just wanted to make sure my attention was taken away, and so I just wanted to make sure I understand the column labeled Washington Renewable Energy with REX. That's Washington's allocated share of all renewable resources that could be owned by PacifiCorp. Is that right? Those aren't.
Yeah, those are all like owned or long-term contracted. So either owned or PPA renewable energy resources that do have those RECs.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And then also you mentioned factors that affected the lower interim target, including decommissioning and lower water. I wonder, this might be a little bit too global, but is that analysis going to find its way into the CEIP, or does it differ with what we saw in the IRP this last spring? In other words, how is it going to be kind of incorporated into the planning going forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if anyone from the IRP team is on and wants to speak to, because there was a little bit of a change, I believe, in the 2025 IRP and kind of the baseline sort of assumptions around climate. And I'm not the one to speak on that. I don't know if anyone is online. But before they do answer that, I think that this is starting to come to everyone's attention. I think all IOUs are facing this issue where our forecasts are maybe a little bit optimistic, and then in reality our climate conditions are impacting our progress. And I know that in a separate world, in the use rulemaking docket, I know that there was a suggestion, a draft rule at some point that would maybe incorporate the use of like a worst case climate option for IOUs to model. I think in general, this is something we are considering. I think what we are unsure of is if we were to do an additional sensitivity that were potentially to represent kind of worst case scenario, would it just be a sensitivity to kind of show the extreme benchmarks, or should it be what we base our targets off of? I think that's where we've always struggled, because it's always been our understanding that we should try to model to the expected case, although expected case is a little bit nuanced for us for Washington, because we have to use the social cost of greenhouse gases, and that's actually not what we consider our expected case, and that does impact dispatch. So yeah, it's something we're grappling with, but I don't think we have like the golden answer for what that should look like as far as what should our targets truly be based on. And I mentioned the social cost of greenhouse gases because the cost adder, because it's a cost adder both on emitting generation, but also increases the market price that the model sees, it does inherently result in a dispatch order that might prefer resources like renewable resources that it otherwise might have tried to curtail. Whereas in reality, curtailment might occur because of actual transmission constraints and actual costs. So yeah, we're grappling with that. But I don't know if the IRP team wants to speak to how that modeling is done kind of in the 25 IRP and like the base assumptions. Yeah,
Sorry,
so
Rahini.
yeah.
This is Samuel Zachariah. Could you rephrase the question? I was otherwise occupied.
Yes, so I'm wondering if you can kind of summarize, particularly in the 25 IRP, how we do or don't account for climate change and how that might impact things like hydro, wind, renewables in just like our normal forecast of resources.
Yes. So I'm Samuel Zachariah, IRP team. So our load forecast includes climate change adjustments. So when we look into the future, rather than just assuming that the median conditions in the future will be the same as they were before, we actually take the higher than the 50th percentile so that we have peaks that will be higher. And then the hydro forecast itself is based on climate change. So it incorporates the fact that the pattern of water flows are actually going to change in the future, and they won't necessarily be the same as they were in 2023 or 2024. Does that cover Paul's question?
So let's hear from you, Paul. Had a
I
couple
think,
different answers.
yeah, and I think it does. And I don't know, I may be jumping the gun a little bit because I mean, this is a progress report from one single year. And I just wanted to kind of hear from the Civicorp that that this is being taken into consideration in some way. So it's not, you know, we don't just kind of stick with our series of models that we've run in year one, and then we find ourselves surprised every year that you know, by these kind of differing results. But it sounds like that it's an iterative process that's ongoing.
Yes, definitely. And I'm sure that we're going to revisit our hydro forecast in particular for the 2027 IRP just to see how they're doing.
One change that was made that Samuel's not highlighting, which was a significant change for the 2025 IRP compared to prior years, is we used to have kind of these generic shapes for 1 year that were applied geographically to each of our proxy renewables. So for wind and solar, they had kind of these constant shapes every single year throughout the period. And now those are actually based off of historical patterns. And that's where my knowledge of that ends. So Samuel can fill in the gap. But I think that's also a
Yes.
great step.
Yes, we have a unique shape for a bunch of different locations on the system for wind and solar that we got from a consultant, where they took some of the past data that we had and then they actually projected forward what a proxy shape might look like.
So that at least I think starts to lend a little bit more reality to what those forecasts look like. And it is an iterative process, but we are very open to feedback on this as well. If staff or other parties have kind of specific recommendations for how we should be considering these types of conditions in our interim target forecast, we are very open. We're building the 2025 CEIP modeling as we speak. And so this is a great time, I think, to work through those issues. So I appreciate the
Yes,
comment.
and just one other thing, Rohini, we did also in the 25 IRP, we had for stochastics, we had different hydro year conditions. And we could certainly look in the CEIP at taking one of the worst hydro years and just seeing what that would look like as a sensitivity so that we have a range of assumptions about hydro.
So thank you so much to the Pacific Core team. It's one of the benefits of having everybody on the line and ready to jump in. And I think that's really interesting and important to not only be planning for the current status quo, but also for the anticipated changes that might occur.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you. Assuming there's no more questions.
Not seeing any, but that does not mean that that they might not come in a little bit later. A big believer that, you know, this is a lot of information, or can be, and some people need to digest, and that's okay. Feel free to drop any follow-up questions, comments, feedback in the chat, and we can raise it with the appropriate subject matter experts later in the meeting. But we also offer public comment in these spaces. So that's also another great opportunity if you're digesting this information and want to think on it during the break and bring it up towards the end of the meeting during that time as well. But thank you so much, Rohini. Why don't we go to the next slide? And here we're going to go ahead and hand it to Robert Warren. Robert, are you in virtual land?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're coming in wonderfully.
Perfect.
The stage is yours.
Oh, all right. Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Warren. I am a senior load forecast analyst here, and I have worked to put together many of the CBI metrics you'll find in our upcoming CIP progress report. And today I'll be taking you through the highlights of these CBI metrics. Next slide, please. Okay, before we get into the highlights, I wanted to talk about what's new for the 2025 progress report compared to last year's report. First of all, the company did not perform a residential survey during 2024. And this has an impact on several of our metrics. CBIs with metrics that use survey data are CBI 1, CBI 6, and CBI 7 that you can see here on the slide. The survey happens every odd numbered year, with the next survey occurring this fall. Also new for the 2025 progress report, a new vulnerable population methodology has been adopted, which utilizes census tract-based data rather than responses from residential surveys. This new methodology is a result of 3 workshops with input from interested parties and advisory group members, and the 2021 CEIP settlement condition number 14. There are some overlap between highly impacted communities and vulnerable populations. There are 36 vulnerable population census tracts in Pacific Power's service area, of which 19 are also highly impacted communities. And to give you an idea of how many customers this makes up, there's about 60,000 customers in these 36 vulnerable population census tracts. Let's get into the CBI metrics now. Next slide, please.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, this is Yoki from the Energy Project. Thanks for this presentation, Robert. So that means that there are more customers classified as vulnerable populations than in highly impacted communities now. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Gotcha, thank you. And can you remind me where we can find the kind of written description of the new vulnerable population methodology?
Yes, there is. I believe there is a presentation from one of the last workshops that breaks it down. So we'll have to get back to you on that, where exactly you can find the written methodology.
Yeah. Yuki, I'll go ahead and add that link to the chat for you. The workshops, we both have the presentations, but in the January workshop, I believe that was also recorded, and that's the workshop 3 where the outcomes were presented. So I'll add those links for you in the chat if that works for you.
Yeah, that sounds great. And then I guess a follow-up question, if it's only been a workshop presentation, is where, in all the filings that are coming up later this year, where would that be described or cataloged in kind of the 2025 filings?
Great question, and saw a thumbs up from Charlie. So sounds like it's a question that several participants might have. So wondering, Pacific Core team, yeah, where are these going to be memorialized in filings and kind of set in stone in those ways, I believe is what Yoki's asking, right?
Yeah. So I believe the 2025 CIP will have the details that you're looking for.
Great, thank you, and appreciate all the work that went into that, and excited to kind of review again the final product there. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your questions. Okay, so let's see. Great. So the first CBI that we'll be covering today is the increased culturally and linguistically responsive outreach and program communication, where we focus on outreach in non-English languages about company programs. Next slide, please. All right. Here we have a table of the number of non-English communication channels used by program or topic. In this presentation, the baseline year will vary depending on the data availability for each metric. It ranges from 2019 to 2024. For this table, the baseline year will be 2020. The table here shows that we had a total of 36 channels used for 2024, and while this is a small drop in communication channels used from 2023. Pacific Power is continuing to engage with customers above the 2020 baseline level, and is utilizing effective channels such as working with local Spanish-speaking influencers to build program awareness. And next slide, please. One of these programs is the WattSmart program, and here you'll see two pictures of Pacific Power engaging with the community with WattSmart. And next slide, please. All right. So this table here shows the number of languages used for translated materials. This was a metric introduced last year, so the baseline year is 2023. As you can see, the number in the top row, Pacific Power has greatly expanded the number of languages the company's call center can assist with. The company also has a dedicated Spanish-speaking call center team to assist with the 30% of households in our service area that are Spanish-speaking. Next slide, please. All right, so the next CBI is increased community-focused efforts and investments, where we'll talk about community workshops in EV charging stations. Next slide, please.
Hey, gonna pause you there, Robert. I have a hand up piece, so I'd love to hear from you while we have the slide in question up.
Yeah, if I could actually go back to slide 18, if you don't mind. I was just curious, when you describe the kind of first three lines there, does that include kind of final bill notices, late bill notices, and disconnection notices in there, or would that be kind of a separate separate category?
And that would be, the billing systems, customer services, telephone, and website bill message, and the energy assistance, advertising, social media brochures. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering if any of those encompass past due bill notices, final due bill notices, and then, disconnection notices as well.
Yeah. I'm not entirely familiar with the details of these materials, so we can contact the subject matter experts to get an answer on that. That's a good question.
Yeah, great question. I do see that we have some folks that intersect with the LIAG, or the Low Income Advisory Group, on the line. I'm wondering if we have any insight from other SMEs, and okay, if not, it might be just a follow-up that we give to folks offline, Yoki. All right, not seeing anybody jump off mute, but I'll take that as an action item to follow up on exactly how and what cadence those communications are sent in the Spanish language.
Yeah, and I think the request would be, if it's included in here, just to note that in the format, and if not, I think it would be great to add that so that we're tracking, okay, when customers are being told that they're past due or at risk of disconnection, what language is that going out in?
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. All right, back to you, Robert.
Okay. So the next CBI is increased community-focused efforts and investments, where we will talk about community workshops and EV charging stations. Next slide. Okay. So here's a table of the number of EV charging stations installed in our service area as of last month. This is also the first metric we are seeing today that has accounts available by the new vulnerable population definitions. Do want to note that the drop in non-HIC from 2024 to 2025 is due to the introduction of vulnerable populations, and now is sort of recategorized as non-HIC and or vulnerable populations. So these are chargers that are not in vulnerable or sensitive census tracts. Right. Next slide, please. All right, community workshops. So in 2024, we had a total of 15 workshops that spanned different programs such as Watt Smart, Clean Building, Home Energy Savings, and others. The workshops were counted as highly impacted community, vulnerable populations, or another designation by either the physical location of the workshop, or if the workshop was held online, the workshops counted towards one of these designations based on the locations of the online attendance. So if there was an attendant in HIC, and then highly impacted community census tract, and then another that was in a non-HIC or a non-vulnerable population census tract, and then that workshop counted into both designations, which is why the numbers of workshop doesn't total up to 15. So I wanted to give that clarification. Right. So next slide, please. Okay. Next CBI overview is for CBI 3, increased participation in company energy and efficiency programs and billing assistance programs. Metrics in the CBI include the number of households and businesses that participate in these programs and dollar value of program expenditures. Next slide, please. Okay, so for 2024, there was a significant increase in participation and expenditure for the demand response and load management programs. All three of the demand response programs, which are irrigation load control, Watt Smart business demand response, and optimal time rewards, added capacity over 2024, which led to the increase in participation and expenditure we're seeing here. One of these programs, the optimal time rewards, was new for 2024. Next slide, please. Okay, here we see some graphs about participation in rebates and bill assistance programs for 2020, 2023, and 2024. Vulnerable population is only available for 2024 as the new methodology was adopted this year, and these programs were not targeted towards the vulnerable population census tracts in the prior years. On the slide here, you'll see that about 3% of our customers in our service area participated in the residential appliance and equipment rebates. Typically, each year we reach new customers. Generally, the same customer does not participate in the rebate programs for multiple years. For example, when a customer upgrades to a heat pump, that heat pump will be operational for many years, and the customer won't need to apply for appliance rebates in the following years. Great. Next slide. Yeah. Okay. So let's get into rebates delivered to rental units. First, I wanted to note a change in methodology from year to year. Last year, we used the residential survey to determine if a customer self-identified as a renter that paired that with the energy savings per year from the DSM participation tracking data. For 2024, we were able to rely just on the DSM participation data. This may have led to the decrease in total projects we see here on the slide, but this decrease is also due in part to during 2023, there were a lot of direct installs for lighting, and most customers who are eligible for these direct installs had the projects completed in 2023, and leading to the number of direct installs dropping off in 2024. We do see that the average savings per customer in kilowatt hours per year has increased over the year. So per rental unit or customer, the savings is greater. Next slide, please.
I'm gonna hold you there and go back one more
Sure.
slide real
Oh,
quick, Robert. I see Yoki's hand back up, so welcome to the virtual stage. Excited to hear your question.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Robert. If we go back to 24 again, what I'm particularly interested in, following the percentage of known low-income customers that are getting bill assistance. That's kind of the key metric that the Energy Project is interested in and tracking. And I guess one of the things that I wanted to request around the reporting of that is the specification of, oh, it looks like you're reporting number of customers and not percentage. And I guess so let me start with a question there because there are some percentages on the right. And so were you planning on reporting percentages as well as absolute numbers, or were you looking at just reporting absolute numbers there?
Yes, that's a good question. So I do believe that the percentages will be available in our upcoming filing or report card.
Okay, great. And then I guess the request there would just be if you could be explicit about what the denominator used in those percentages are and what which low income needs assessment that that number comes from, and if it changes over the years reported. We just look at that data really closely, so want to make sure we understand which denominator is used for each year if you're reporting percentages.
Okay, yeah, no, that'd be good. We can do
Yeah.
that.
Great feedback. Thank you so much, Yoki. And I will confirm that the CBI is on both number and percentages. So in the full report, you will be able to get that information. And we are tracking that feedback as far as ensuring that the right denominators and all the assumptions are accurately captured for the filing itself. So footnotes away.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for the question. Okay, continuing, our next CBI is increased efficiency of housing stock and small businesses, including low-income housing. The metric here is the number of household and small businesses that participate in the energy efficiency programs and the dollar value of expenditures. Next slide. All right, let's start with home energy savings and low-income weatherization. Here we have graphs for the number of participants on the left side, and graphs on the right side, we have expenditures. Again, vulnerable populations is only available for 2024, so this will serve as a baseline going forward. As shown in the graph, participation and expenditures for 2020 to 2024 has increased for highly impacted communities and all customers. I do want to note tribal lands is fairly small in the graph here. There was 2 participants in 2024, so any change when we're working with that number of participants will be pretty significant. So next slide, please. Okay, this slide shows the same graphs as the last slides, but for WattSmart Business and WattSmart Small Business. The WattSmart Business excludes businesses that qualified for the small business program. So that's the difference between the 2 categories there. In comparison to 2020, the WattSmart Small Business shows significant increase in both participation and expenditures. One highlight of this metric is that small businesses in highly impacted communities make up about 65% of the total participants in small businesses. Right. And next slide, please.
And prior to going to the next slide, Robert, I just want to give a big shout out. I see several of our advisory group members from the EAG, the Equity Advisory Group, as well as we heard from Charlie earlier from the LIAG, for their feedback in giving the direction to really emphasize the outreach and driving the charge for emphasize or for that concentrated outreach to small businesses. So this is the advisory groups more broadly, I suppose, work in action, and we just really appreciate the feedback supplied in those spaces, but as well as here. And yep, great correction there, Kimberly, as well as the demand side advisory group. So big shout out to our advisory groups and to you all for engaging with us today to give us your feedback. Sorry to jump in there, Robert. I'll let you continue
No
to take
worries.
it away.
Yeah, and I will actually now pass the stage over to Mike Sullivan for this next CBI.
Hello, am I coming in okay?
You're coming in wonderfully. Welcome,
Good.
Michael.
Good morning, everybody. So yeah, I'm going to talk about our GHG customer benefit indicator. So for those who don't know, my name is Mike Sullivan. I'm the carbon policy advisor here at PacifiCorp on the carbon policy and reporting team. So we're going to talk about our amount of renewables and our allocated greenhouse gases. So if you want to go to the next slide. Some of y'all may remember me on the previous episode of CAIP where we talked about a methodology change. So the annual CO2e emissions report for Washington, the CBI originally proposed using a calculation by Department of Commerce that's since been repealed. So our proposal to the group a few months ago was, let's use what we report to Washington Department of Ecology. That's third-party verified. That's an ongoing reporting program that we do. That's regularly looked at and reviewed, and it's a more robust emissions reporting. So we have switched that over. So if these numbers don't match a prior CEIP, that's why we have updated the baselines accordingly. So the chart on the left, 2020, 2022, and 2023 are all in accordance with the ecology reporting methodology. For those very good ecology sleuths, you may think that the CCA wasn't around in 2020. Very good. So we went back and calculated what our emissions would have been under that methodology in 2020. So we have an appropriate baseline. So anyway, that's what we have there on the left. And on the right, you can see a bar chart breakdown of our annual clean energy serving Washington retail sales, essentially a visual representation of what Rohini had showed prior. And unfortunately, I think that is the end of the mic show. So we're going to turn it back over to Robert, unless folks have questions.
We'll give it a second because I know that several folks are digesters and partially, I'm just biased. I like the mic show. Come on.
The mic show also talks very quickly, so we'll wait for folks to ask any questions and jump in. And I'm happy to discuss this offline as people know. So.
Awesome. Well, I think I stalled enough to make sure no hands went up and nothing was added to the chat. But I do appreciate you, Mike. And should we get any questions later in the meeting, you'll be the first to know. So be careful. The mic show might be coming back.
It's a recurring show. We love it. So thanks.
Thanks. Back to you, Robert.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Mike. Okay, so this next metric, CBI 6, decrease households experiencing high energy burden, measures the number and percent of customers experiencing high energy burden, as well as reporting the average excess energy burden. Next slide, please. Okay, so as stated before we got into the CBI metrics, CBI 6 was one of them that was impacted by not having a residential survey in 2024. Due to this, we were not able to update energy burden figures for highly impacted communities, vulnerable populations, tribal lands, known low income, and for all customers. The calculations for these populations use self-reported income, which comes from the survey responses. However, we can report energy burden for low-income bill assistance and low-income weatherization participants, which utilize income as reported by the implementation agencies. Low-income bill assistance energy burden is level year over year. However, I do want to provide some more context about the low-income weatherization participants' energy burden. This population is showing an increase in energy burden levels over 2023. Low-income weatherization is a smaller program. In 2024, there was 69 total participants, which is a drop from 2023, which had, I believe, 90, if I remember that correctly off the top of my head. We also received a more complete list of participant income this year from the implementation agencies, which allows for us to create a clearer picture of what energy burden is for this population. So these two factors can create year-to-year volatility in energy burden, which I believe is what we may be seeing here. Next slide, please. Okay, this next CBI is reducing residential customer disconnections, which is measured by the number and percent of disconnections for various populations. Next slide, please. So this graph shows the annual residential disconnections for tribal lands, highly impacted communities, vulnerable populations, known low income, and all customers. 2019 will serve as our baseline year due to the disconnection moratorium that was introduced during COVID-19 in 2020, and that continued through 2021. And after this moratorium, there was additional review that was needed prior to a disconnection occurring. And this affected the disconnections that we're seeing in 2023. So 2024 is a return to pre-COVID behavior for disconnections, I believe. And for vulnerable populations, 2024 will serve as a baseline going forward, as we did not have this methodology for prior years. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is our last CBI that we'll cover today. It's increased named community clean energy, which measures the megawatt hours of private renewable generation and private storage in named communities, and the total megawatt hours of energy savings from energy efficiency programs. Next slide.
Yeah, actually, prior to going forward, wondering if we could go back to the disconnection slide. I do see a hand up from Yoki, and I want to make sure that we address the comments and questions and feedback with the appropriate slides up and with minimal disruption to you, Robert. So Yoki, yeah. I give you the virtual mic.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually gonna go back a little before, if we could go to slide 32 on the reduction of high energy burden.
Yeah.
So I guess so you're saying the reason why data isn't available for 2024 is because there's no customer survey to self-report income data specifically. That's the missing input there.
Yes, yeah. We use the survey to obtain self-reported income levels in about $10,000 ranges, and that we don't have for 2024, as people's incomes may change over certain years. And yeah, so that's why we don't have updates for those populations for 2024.
Yeah. And is it the company's kind of general plan is to have that customer survey every other year, I think you said, so you would expect this to be um a recurring issue where you're only going to be collecting data every other year?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I wonder, so I don't have a specific recommendation here, but I'm just kind of brainstorming, and I'm wondering if we could think together about how to develop some sort of methodology that doesn't have us skipping uh such data every other year in perpetuity. um and so, yeah, I mean, we could think about different ways to do that. And I hesitate to make a specific recommendation off the top of my head, but maybe more to say, why don't we think about that a little bit? Because I feel like I'd rather have data of some sort, even if it means perhaps changing the source of the income or keeping it constant over years. And I see Charlie's hands up, so I'll stop now. Thanks.
No, I'll first say thank you for that input, Yoki. I think through the VP workshops or the vulnerable population workshops, a big part of the conversation was data availability and how best to capture these items. And I know that the Pacific Core team is committed to accurately reflecting this. So want to validate no need for you to come with all the solutions today, but appreciate you bringing this question up. But Charlie, I see your hand up, and I want to make sure that you're heard in this space.
Yeah, thanks. Going off of that, and that's a good suggestion. Just looking at how to make the data available for this CBI, like it's available for the others. I was curious, how does the company's low income needs assessment or energy burden analysis factor into this? Because I know that's also obviously not an annual assessment or analysis, but if it's done on any of those offset survey years, that could be another source to look into, or something to use as like the constant to hold in those off survey years too. Does that question make sense? How the LENA and EBA factor into the CBI?
Yeah, that does make sense. Well, the energy burden assessment is sort of handled separately from the CBI. So it's a separate process. So we can look into how that can be supplemented for the off years. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that was the only idea that I had. But yeah, happy to keep thinking about this one too.
Awesome, thank you. So we'll note that as follow-up, and I know that a lot of internal conversations I'm sure will be spurred by this. So thank you all for bringing up this feedback. This is the space, so we really appreciate you guys engaging. Julian, I see your hand up. Welcome to the conversation.
Hey, thank you so much. Yeah, so I was wondering for the CBI since it states decrease households experiencing high energy burden, do you all have like a target and a timeline for how much and how quickly you want to decrease burden?
That's a great question.
No, that is a good question. As far as I'm aware, we do not have a goal in mind. So this is,
yeah, I would add that I think that largely the CBIs are informational. I think this is a tough question to address, but an important one. But it might require some offline conversations and some follow-up. Are you comfortable with that, Julian? Can we connect? And happy to include anybody else that would want to be part of that. But would love to continue that conversation when we have more of the right people in the room to speak to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, thank you so much. Yoki, welcome back. Come on, give it to us.
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to just build off or maybe respond a little bit to Julian's question, and to note that the Department of Commerce, when they're doing their energy burden reporting and collection, I believe has set a 6% of income as typically a threshold that they're kind of aiming for. And that would include all energy expenditures. So if a customer has a fuel source in addition to electric, such as natural gas or wood or propane, that would include those. So sometimes, but if the customer is all electric, then that would be 6% all electric. So I think that in the last couple years, we've, I think a lot of interested persons in the state have kind of been using that 6% of household income as kind of an energy burden target. But I don't think it's the only number that is supported by data or or advocates out there, but it is one that has been used a lot recently.
Yeah, great contribution. I did see the director of the Clean Energy Planning team come online. Dr. Rohini Ghosh, welcome, and would love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the conversation. I think it's very thoughtful. But one thing I do want to say to kind of ease the pressure on the rest of my folks is, when we're talking about these CBIs in this particular context and space, we really view these as informational things. And for us, as folks that are doing resource planning, forecasting, yes, in some instances, folks are managing programs. I think this is really, we have to remember we're the utility, we're the electric utility. We, I think, really view the CBIs as meant to be informational, meant to track over time so that we are aware of our impact. It's not necessarily that we are saying we will reduce these things to this point. It's so that we can see what our impact is over time. And if things are not going in a great direction, we say, okay, wait a minute. What does that mean? But that's still a larger utility question, I think, and often far beyond what we can control. Obviously, some things more so than others, like renewable energy, for example, because we are kind of planning procurement in many ways. And so I just want to reiterate that, I think bringing in equity considerations to the conversation is really important as we're doing clean energy planning. So we're being mindful of kind of where we fit into this larger ecosystem and where we are impacting customers, but it's not necessarily our prerogative to say we are going to hit a certain target, because there are so many factors out of our control. We can't necessarily control income for customers, but we do have low income programs and bill assistance programs that other folks in the company run, so that we are able to reduce that burden where we can. And so some of this conversation might be really applicable in a different space, and folks can plug the information for our low income advisory group and for working with Charity Spires. But I just want to reiterate that, right? We're really mindful, I think, of tracking information that means something, but being really careful to suggest that we can control all of the outcomes. And so I want to, so we're not putting too much pressure on the folks on the line from the company to kind of answer to things that they can't control. But thank you. Very thoughtful conversation.
Thank you for the contribution. I think that's very helpful to kind of set guardrails up on this, and to make sure that we're hearing and considering the feedback, but while also keeping it realistic on what is being shown. So I really appreciate you adding that color, Rohini. Right, there's been a lot of discussion on this, so I'm going to give it just a minute and see if there's anybody else that wants to follow up here or has any additional questions or comments. And absent seeing those pop up, we'll give it back to Robert to continue on with the last CBI. I think CBI was at 10.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this last CBI, increasing named community clean energy, which is measuring the megawatt hours of private renewable generation and private storage in named communities, and the total megawatt hours of energy savings from energy efficiency programs. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the top half of this table displays the private generation and storage for highly impacted communities, vulnerable populations, and known low-income customers. Year over year shows an increase in both generation and storage for all three populations, with the exception of storage for known low-income customers remaining at 0. Overall, there's not a lot of storage available in these populations, so that we're seeing known low-income customers remaining at 0 is not surprising. The bottom half of the table shows the total megawatt hours of energy savings per year for each population. Since this metric for both the renewable generation and storage and energy savings programs was introduced last year, 2023 will serve as a baseline, but 2024 will serve as a baseline for vulnerable population energy savings due to energy savings being a result of the DSM programs. Because of the methodology for vulnerable populations adopted this year, the programs were not focused on the vulnerable population tracks in the prior years. So with that, that's all that I have for CBIs. And unless there's any questions, I will be passing it back to Morgan.
Awesome. Thank you, Robert. I'll give it a second. I know a lot of information being presented and thrown your guys' way. Again, these are published, the slides themselves. And again, this is more of just a spotlight and preview of what will be filed in the annual progress report. So more information to come there. But a big thank you to Robert and team for compiling and sharing this information with us today. I have several action items and follow-ups noted for us as the facilitation and the engagement team. So we'll be sure to do that preceding this meeting. But I think I rambled enough to make sure no hands went up or nothing was dropped in the chat. Thank you so very much, Robert. And why don't we go ahead and shift. Kara, are you out there in virtual land?
I am. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, you're coming in great. We're excited to have you. And I think this is where we'll get into some of what Charlie was asking about earlier in the meeting on some settlement condition items. So excited to have you here, Kara.
Yeah, I also wanted to note that our earlier discussion about 30 seconds ago dovetails nicely with what I'm going to be presenting on today. So very excited about that. For those of you who don't know me, haven't met me, my name is Kara Glennon Olson. I'm our customer benefits indicator advisor here at PacifiCorp. So I work really closely with folks like Robert and then also Christina to talk about our programs, to develop our filings, et cetera, et cetera. So with that having been said, we've received revised 2021 settlement conditions. And one of those conditions is that we must select 2 CBIs and then collaborate with our stakeholders to identify 5 subsets of named communities in our Washington service area And then additionally, we've been asked to identify the level of granularity at which we should be tracking this data and reporting on it. So right now I'm going to talk very briefly about the CBIs that we have selected. The first of these is to increase culturally and linguistically responsive outreach and program communications. So why would we do this? Why would we check this one or select this one? I'm sorry, I misspoke there. We believe it matters because we want to ensure that program outreach is accessible and relevant to all communities that we serve, particularly for non-English speaking populations. Our hope is that we can do our part to help bridge communication gaps, and then to promote equitable access to customer support programs that we offer as a utility. For this, we've got a couple of metrics, 3 metrics to be exact. The first of these is the number of topics addressed in outreach in non-English languages. This can track the breadth of multilingual content that we share. For example, on energy saving tips, program eligibility, for example, low-income bill assistance, and then information on application processes to make them more accessible, these programs more accessible. We also are looking at tracking the number of impressions from non-English outreach. So this is a measure of reach and visibility of the multilingual campaigns that we offer, for example, across social media, print, radio, and then also, of course, our community partnerships, so the boots on the ground work that we do. We also want to track the percentage of responses to surveys in Spanish. This can, not absolutely is, an indicator of the effectiveness of the Spanish language engagement efforts that we have invested in. And additionally, the extent to which Spanish-speaking customers are participating, right? I'll stop for a second for questions. I recognize that I am speaking pretty fast here. Are there any questions, comments, feedback?
So we do have a question in the chat from Jacob, saying that it's my understanding that PacifiCorp does not provide energy to Washington State, which I think might be outside of this section specifically.
I think it is. Yeah, it's not covered in this slide. Or the next one, I don't think.
Okay, perfect. So wondering, Jacob, are you able to come off mute? I want to make sure that we address your question, but maybe want some clarification on what you mean by providing energy or PacifiCorp. Oh, you do not have a mic? Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Well, why don't I'll work to chat with you to make sure that we're understanding your question on the side while we give it back to you, Kara, to continue.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, if it's something that it's my place to speak to, I certainly will do that. With that having been said, the second CBI that we've selected, could you back up a little bit? Just one slide. We're not quite ready there. We're not quite ready for this slide. Okay. So the second CBI that we selected is to decrease households that are experiencing high energy burden. This matters because reducing high energy burden, especially when a large portion of an individual or household's income goes into energy bills, improves affordability and then also can advance energy equity for low-income customers. The detailed metrics that we're looking at here are the number and percent of customers who are experiencing high energy burden, which is something that we touched on briefly in Robert's presentation. It can provide insight into the scale and into the distribution of energy insecurity in our service territory based on information provided by customers in the residential survey, but we can also explore other means by which to collect this information on a more frequent basis. So just want to throw that out there. Number and percentage of eligible households that participate in low-income bill assistance programs. What we're trying to understand here is the penetration of our financial assistance resources among eligible households, so that we can work toward identifying outreach and enrollment barriers. The number and percentage of eligible households that participate in low-income weatherization programs. What we're looking for here is to understand the uptake of long-term energy efficiency measures among customers who are eligible, with looking at sustained bill reduction and also comfort in the home. Stop again for a second for questions. Does anybody have anything for me right now?
Not seeing anything immediately, but I will let you know if anything pops up.
Perfect. And of course, anyone who wants to is available. I'm available for questions. So feel free to stop me. So what are we looking at here? How are we going to accomplish this? Well, we all got together, we brainstormed, and we think that an interactive listening session at the July Equity Advisory Group meeting is the approach that we'd like to take. That meeting is to take place on July 10th. The objective is because we want to facilitate a discussion from which we can identify these 5 named communities, and then also that level of tracking granularity that we need to effectively evaluate them. So what is the goal here? We want to center community input. So we want to open a dialogue around which our community stakeholders can benefit or help us identify from more tailored outreach and tracking. We also want to hear from the EAG so that we can begin to identify these key priorities that maybe aren't captured by current data that we've been able to collect. So for example, demographic data as provided by the ACS, additional data as acquired from the residential survey and things like that. We also want to explore definitions of granularity. We've discovered in some of our own internal conversations that people have different interpretations of what that means. So for example, it might be spatial granularity, it could be with the frequency of reporting. And this conversation, this idea that we're having is to maybe shape how we approach tracking and reporting going forward. We also want to create an environment in which we can encourage shared reflection. We want to make this session an opportunity to share perspectives and bring up and understand community-specific insights a little better, because these may, not will, but may guide improvements to programs and program development going forward. And that said, I want to say that it's not about final decisions. What we're trying to do here is start a conversation to ensure that our efforts as a utility, what we can do, reflects the real world experience of our customers. We also, as I noted, we want to inform future directions, right? So input gathered from this settlement condition, the work that we're going to try and do here in response to this settlement condition, it may be able to help us refine outreach strategies. It may be able to, it may give us the ability to look at ways that we can increase clarity of communications, accessibility, and then of course, alignment with our CBIs. The other thing that this helps us do is it helps us to support equitable evaluation practices, right? So this approach can inform how we begin to think about tracking progress in a way that's meaningful to the communities that we serve. Because going back to earlier points, firm quantitative data doesn't always give us a complete picture or inform us relative to things like CBIs. And it's a step, that said, toward co-developing metrics, right, that reflect shared values and needs of the communities that we serve. Importantly, taking this approach also allows us to create a thoughtful space. We want it to be an open, respectful space where participants can raise ideas, they can ask questions, and they can express concerns freely. So basically, in essence, with this listening session, what we want to do is to listen and to learn. We want this discussion with our stakeholders to be driven by them. We do not want to pre-describe or predefine anything going into this session. So what does this do? Why? Some of this is a little redundant. I've already touched on it. For that, I apologize. I'm very passionate about these topics, and I have a tendency to circle around. So apologies in advance. What this can help us do, and again, help us do, is to ground our programs, what we're capable of doing in community priorities and also their lived realities, right? So programs that are shaped based on community prioritization, for example, non-English speaking outreach, and by prioritizing demographics and locally defined needs, are more likely to reach eligible residents, right? We're more likely to get that information to them. So rather than applying these top-down assumptions relative to program development and outreach, we're hoping that this session can allow for a more granular, localized input that can help us be more responsive and relevant where we are able to relative to program development. It can also, as I noted very briefly, these sessions can also reveal compounding vulnerabilities hidden in the data, right? So as I noted before, quantitative data can only tell us part of the story. It cannot inform everything. These types of sessions provide that critical supplementary qualitative context, right? So this can bring up challenges that may not show up in the existing data sets. For example, with the residential survey, that's a perfect example. It can help us to identify what language barriers there are. Is housing insecurity a concern? How does that complement these two CBIs? Are there health limitations, or is immigration status a concern that intersects, that can limit access to energy programs? And this is one of those situations where you can say, yes, of course it does, but you really need that data to back it up. So these are essential to designing equity-centered solutions, right? And this comes from regulatory guidance, among other things. I just will say that. So ultimately, and I'll wrap up the conversation very shortly here, we want to enable development of community-specific program strategies, right? Because we do have RBMs, we do have folks out on the field, and we want to help inform and support their work. So with that having been said, it can help us develop tailored outreach and also delivery strategies, supporting strategies for delivery of the low-income bill assistance program, and then also low-income weatherization, of course. So this might include adapting materials linguistically and culturally. Maybe we're missing something or not understanding something. It also helps us to build that trust with local organizations. And we can coordinate ultimately going down the road, maybe to simplify enrollment processes, to get more information out there. So that goes back to taking community-specific approaches. We want to improve awareness because we can do that. We can work toward that. And we also want to build trust. And we hope, but we can't guarantee, that this can help us to increase program participation. And it can maybe help us impact program performance, if that makes sense. So with that, I will turn it over for questions, and then hand it back over to Morgan for the next section.
Lady, thank you so much, Kara. I am going to give it a second because the next part is break. So some water breaks and stretching of legs is in order. So not seeing any immediately, Kara.
Perfect.
All righty. I guess one just repeating more than anything, Kara, would be that you'll also be at the upcoming EAG to speak a little bit more on this. Those are also public meetings. Again, I mentioned we have a few folks on the line that we're so excited to be here. But should anybody want to continue that conversation, that is an opportunity for you. But with that, you guys have heard a lot. It's been a information-rich morning, and I think that we've earned ourselves a little bit of a break. We'll go ahead and add a 10-minute timer, and we will see you all back at the top of the hour. Thank you all, and see you soon. All righty. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had an enjoyable little respite from this great information that we're hearing today. Why don't we go ahead and go to the next slide, and we will hand it over to our IRP team. Samuel, do we have you on the line?
Yes, we do. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're coming in wonderfully.
Great. Thank you. I'm Samuel Zachariah, and I work on the IRP team as an analyst. And I'll be covering some updates from the Integrated Resource Planning team. Next slide, please. So on March 31st of this year, we published the 2025 IRP, and this table shows the resource shares to serve Washington energy compliance. And with the exception of the nuclear resource that's shown in the top row of this table, all of these resources are situs allocated to serve Washington customers. And we can see in this table that there is over 900 megawatts of wind that are added by the end of 2030, and over 500 megawatts of utility scale solar, and also over a gigawatt of 4-hour batteries and 238 megawatts of 100-hour iron air batteries. And we've noticed for a few years now that there is a tendency for the model to prefer just-in-time compliance. So you might notice that in 2030, we have the biggest wind addition that we have in any year and the biggest solar addition that we have in any year. So the very bottom row labeled potential solar acceleration recognizes that although in the model may have selected all of these resources to come online in 2030, it's possible that some of these resources may actually come online earlier than that year. Next slide, please. And I'll hand it over to Rohini for the next 2 slides.
Thank you. Okay, I'm back briefly, I promise. So just really quickly wanted to go over this kind of draft position for our near-term and long-term clean energy interim targets for Washington customers. So similarly to what I talked about earlier in this meeting about our clean energy targets, we're now looking at this on a forecast basis. And so as part of our long-term integrated resource planning and as part of our clean energy implementation plan, we are both required to submit our next 4-year interim targets. So we'll be looking at 2026 through 2029, as well as our long-term forecast to meet our kind of long-term clean energy goals. As a reminder, specifically by 2030, we want to be greenhouse gas neutral in our supply of electricity. What that means is we actually need to supply at least 80% of our Washington retail sales with our owned and contracted energy resources that are CETA compliant. So that might mean we have the RECs or we have the attributes for that clean energy. And up to 20% of that additional retail sales can actually be met by something like unbundled REC purchases, for example, as alternative compliance. And so from a planning perspective, in our modeling methodology, we do plan to hit at least 100% of that retail sales with clean energy by 2030, recognizing things we talked about earlier and that our forecasts are not perfect. We think that projecting to hit at least 100% gives us some wiggle room where if in reality we're not quite hitting those forecasts because of unpredictable changes in generation, for example, we have a little bit of wiggle room to cover up to that 20% with alternative compliance. By 2045, our entire supply of electricity to Washington customers should be zero carbon emitting, which does mean that not only will we no longer have any like gas-fueled resources on the system to serve Washington, but actually it also means that we would not be going to the market because unspecified market purchases would not be considered clean. And so in reality, that'll be fairly difficult to hit in kind of our current market structure and our current electricity system. But of course, from a modeling perspective, we project building enough electricity generation, enough resources to kind of fully serve Washington retail sales by 2045. So that kind of explains the long-term trajectory that you see in this chart. I do want to reiterate again, these are very much considered draft targets. When we refine our modeling strategy for the 2025 CEIP, particularly taking into account even some of the feedback we got today. So thinking about how we're modeling climate conditions, thinking about things like maybe just-in-time compliance, right? We'll be thinking about those things. We're getting feedback. And then we will set forth more final near-term interim targets. And of course, we are filing basically an update to this plan every 2 years, not just every 4. And so we are always reevaluating, what are the best options in the near term and what do our forecasts look like with best up-to-date information. So all of that being said, this is what the position looked like coming out of the 25 IRP preferred portfolio, which was optimized to meet all state jurisdictional needs. We're focusing on kind of the Washington allocated share of that portfolio, developed optimally and dispatched under the social cost of greenhouse gases. So we can see that the near-term targets are definitely not rising at a super significant rate. When we plug in the requirements to meet 2030 objectives in the model, it tends to favor just-in-time compliance. So it tends to kind of wait until that first year and build everything on 1/1/2020-2030 to kind of generate over that year. We recognize there are risks associated with that strategy. So we are very much in reality as we go out and do like a request for proposals and we go out and do procurement, we are very much not limiting ourselves to only hitting, say, 46% in 2029. We want to be very clear about that, but recognizing lessons learned from our first CEIP, we also don't want to overstate our interim targets as aspirational when we might be being held to those for compliance purposes. So we're kind of towing the line between what is realistic, what is achievable, what is cost effective, and what is kind of in the spirit of the law and what our commissioners looking for us to do. So this is, again, very draft. We will be reevaluating it. We very much welcome feedback on our compliance strategy so that we can incorporate that going forward. One thing that I will point out is in the 2025 IRP, in our Appendix O that kind of covers the Clean Energy Action Plan, we didn't really yet get to a point where we could talk about incremental costs. And so that discussion is really important here, obviously, because if we want to consider earlier compliance, what is the cost of that? So those really key discussion points will be featured in this 2025 CEIP and really important, obviously, part of that discussion.
Yeah, Rohini, we did get a comment and question from Charlie in the chat, and I think you touched on part of it, but just out of an abundance of caution and make sure that we address everything that is being asked. Confirming, are these targets what will be shown in the draft CEIP? And additionally, does PAC anticipate that such a large jump from 2029 to 2030 will significantly increase customer costs between those 2 years? So there's 2 parts to that question.
Yes, both valid questions. As we are wrapping up our Oregon filing, in like 2 weeks, we're going to repivot back here. The IRP team and I were just talking about this. We are hoping to have a new draft interim target position for the draft CEIP because since filing, and I'm previewing what Samuel's going to talk about, since filing of the 2025 IRP, there's already some kind of key updates and modeling enhancements that have been made, which will likely change a little bit of the timing and pace of these selections. Additionally, on the cost side, we are really grappling with potential impacts of federal policy that could change these forecasted tax credits that the model does see as a current benefit, and that could change resource pace and timing for sure. And so we will definitely look at the costs of potentially moving up some of this resource procurement to like 2028 or 2029. I think there's only so much we can move forward given that we're in mid 2025. But looking at the timing of when we might expect to contract new resources based on a 2025 RFP, which again will get talked about a little bit more later on in the presentation, we will be balancing those cost impacts. So all very valid questions. I think all of them we will address, or at least try to. Yes. But it's just the model always sees it as, well, I'm going to build this on 1/1/2026, 2030. And so rationally, we know that, we can see that, and it is worth, if we have resource options that are cost effective at the time we have those bids, of course, we would consider moving that up by 1 or 2 years. And we would have an interest to smooth those cost impacts.
Thank you so much, Rohini, and for asking those great questions, Charlie. Any other follow-up there for Rohini before we let her continue on?
We can go to the next slide anyway. It's just zooming into the next 4 years. If folks have questions, they can still bring that up. Once again, our obligation, the way that it's defined formulaically, is based on our retail electric sales. Again, it's adjusted for that qualifying facility generation that we are not on the hook for. And that is forecasted. So that is, of course, imperfect, as those trends can change. And then we are projecting the amount of CETA compliant energy, again, based on forecasts, based on those proxy resource selections. And all of that kind of gives us a target percentage. So while we are, one, balancing the timing and pace of resource selection and procurement, we also want, I think, to be cognizant of what is it that is determining these forecasted positions, and do we need to be more mindful of what assumptions go into that, so that we, again, are not overestimating or over forecasting our compliance position. And so those are all things that we are considering, but we will kind of recast that 2026 through 2029 set of targets in the 2025 CEIP. And have a much more lengthy discussion on costs, because that's important. Okay, that's all I have. I will still be on the line for a little bit if anything else comes up.
All right, thank you, Rohini, and back to you, Samuel.
Yes, thank you, Rohini. So since the publication of the 2025 IRP, we've been busy making some enhancements in the model. So we've laid out some of those here. So the first one is escalation rates. We updated the escalation rates for proxy resources to correct the start year. We updated our handling of production tax credits. So we've now taken the levelized value of the production tax credit over the entire 25 or 30-year life of a wind or solar resource, so that we don't overvalue that production tax credit within the only 21-year time horizon that we're modeling. We updated the handling of the energy efficiency reserve credit to address an error that we had noticed. We also updated the Climate Commitment Act cap and invest price that we model in dispatch for Chehalis to reflect the most recent auction price of $50 a metric ton of greenhouse gas emissions. We updated the price policy scenarios that we use in modeling from September 2024 values to March 2025 values. And the last bullet point here is a vestige from our Oregon Clean Energy Plan presentation, but I'll read it anyway. So we did update our emission factors for Oregon coal to natural gas converted units to reflect recently approved Oregon Department of Environmental Quality factors. Next slide, please. So this shows a little bit more detail on the escalation rate adjustment that we made. So in the 2025 IRP, escalation rates for proxy resources started in 2025, but we realized that they should have been applied from the earliest commercial operation year. We made this update, but the overall effect is very small. It's a less than a 10% impact on the proxy resource capital expenditure costs, and the impact on the total resource cost is even smaller than that, because there are other costs like the fixed operations and maintenance expense that were correctly modeled in the 2025 IRP. Not seeing any questions. Next slide, please. So finally, we're thinking about 2027. So the 2027 Public Input Meeting Series is starting very soon on October 1st, 2025. And this table lays out all of the meetings that we expect to hold to discuss key inputs and data and indicative portfolios all the way to the filing of the 2027 IRP on March 31st, 2027. If anyone has any questions, I'm available to answer them, but otherwise, I think this is the end of my slides.
Samuel, you just did such a great job that you covered it all. That's what I'm hearing or seeing.
That sounds great to me.
And you guys wouldn't believe it, but Samuel is doing us a solid. He actually was feeling a little under the weather and was able to heal up just in time to bring this information to you guys. So we really appreciate you, Samuel, and love having you in this space. All righty. So now we're going to go ahead and shift gears just a little bit. And this is largely a closing the loop item and helping connect how this has been brought to respective advisory group spaces. So I'm going to hand it over to Sarah Reed and Ivers to talk about the Washington request for proposal non-price scoring. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
We can. You're coming in a little quietly, but we can hear you.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Washington RFPs and the non-price scoring. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so as a follow-on to kind of some of the things that Samuel was talking about, we filed a 2025 IRP, and because of this, we will be filing various RFPs, one of which will be in Washington, and that's to address the Washington CETA and for the Western Resource Adequacy Program. We did file, and I see that there's a typo there that I forgot to fix, but we did file a Washington CITUS RFP draft with the Washington Commission, and that is on the 10th of June, not the 6th. And so we're waiting for approval from the Commission to move forward with that. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So here are the next steps and the proposed timeline. Now, don't get hung up too much on the specific dates because this is all, kind of relative to when we get approval to move forward and if it's approved to move forward. So we do plan to issue the RFP. Oh, you're not hearing that?
Oh, no, I'm hearing you. You've great. Just want to make sure, is there anybody else struggling? Okay. Perfect. Got a side chat that you might have been echoing, but
okay.
It sounds like it's all been resolved. Sarah, you're good to go.
Yeah, so we're planning to issue the RFP in late August. And what we do is we usually hold a bidder workshop a couple weeks later so that all potential bidders and stakeholders can take part and hear a little bit more about what the RFP requirements are and how to file and just kind of get that information on how that's going to work. We will take Q&As up until a couple of weeks or about a week until the bids are due. And so the Q&A process is that we have a mailbox that is shown right there on the right of the slide that you can submit questions to our group and we will post answers to those questions for all to see. So we plan to close the bidding process around the late October timeframe. Then we do a series of analyses that include transmission and evaluation of the bids and all that sort of good stuff. And then we start ranking the bids hopefully by May of next year. The plan is to execute and finalize our contracts by the third quarter of next year so that we can have all of the resources online by the end of 2029. So to the right, there is an email address. I just want to point it out again. So if folks have any questions about the RFP or want to be added to the stakeholder or bidders list, please do click on that link and reach out to our team so that we can get in touch with you and include you on our communications. And then can we go to the next slide? So just wanted to talk a little bit about the non-price scoring development, and some of this is a follow-on to some discussions from Kara and Rohini. So we are incorporating a non-price scoring element to our RFP evaluation. And this is so that we can look at more than just cost. We're looking at kind of the invisible costs or social costs of developing resources for energy in certain areas. So we want to look at the impacts of that, such as how it might impact the environment, or if whether or not it creates jobs and that sort of thing, or if people can get trained and there's a workforce being developed in the area. And then we're going to be using an 80-20 mix to evaluate our bids. So 80% will be based on cost, but 20% of the price scoring will be based on these non-price elements. And to develop these, we did the customer benefit indicators. We incorporated those, and we also took a look at the core tenets of energy justice that were created with the guidance of the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission. To the right, there's a little bit here on kind of the process we took on to develop the non-price scoring elements for the RFP. So first, to develop them, we did reach out to some peer utilities. We held internal workshops, and we leveraged the CBIs and energy justice tenants. And we also took on input from other groups such as EAG and groups like this one here. We did put together a rudimentary or kind of a draft of the non-price scoring questions, and we socialized those through a special engagement session in May. And we solicited feedback from participants. Then we refined these non-price scoring elements by taking on some of these inputs. We addressed each and every comment in some way, and there is a matrix of each comment that came in, and Ivers will be covering that in just a moment. And we held internal workshops once again to make sure that we felt that we were really kind of addressing and hearing what folks were saying about certain questions and how we could either change them or address those issues to make it more usable for folks. And then we filed it with our draft RFP in Washington on June 10th. I will pause here before I turn it over to Ivers, but I wanted to see if there were any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. We did get a question in the chat.
Hold on one second.
Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you, sorry.
All good, hey. Technology on a Tuesday. But we did get a question in the chat from Charlie asking that I assume the results for this RFP won't be included in the 2025 CEIP. Will it be included in the 2027 biennial CEIP update? Do we know that?
I'm not sure on the answer on that. I would probably have to talk to some of our internal teams and kind of get some feedback, and I can respond back to that one. But I'm certain that the outcomes of our RFP will be kind of spread, far and wide, because we do tend to share these sorts of things. But I can get back on that specific one.
We would appreciate you doing that. So Charlie, I'm adding that to my list of follow-up and action items.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Ivers, who's going to finish this section.
Ivers, you are still muted.
How is that now?
There you are.
Wonderful. Okay, so as Sarah mentioned, in the RFP scoring, we've got two different kind of elements, the price and the non-price scoring. The non-price scoring feedback, just to kind of dive in a little bit deeper, was pulled together to ensure that we capture those elements of the bid that are not directly captured by the price scoring. And just to further differentiate, the price scoring are those things that have a direct economic kind of impact for a particular bid. Things like the overall bid price, the technology price, volume and timing of the energy generated, things like this that directly have an economic impact on each bid. The non-price scoring, we're trying to ensure that our consideration and evaluation of a bid includes elements that are not easily captured in terms of a monetary value. Things like customer benefit indicators, energy justice tenets, and other elements that really reflect the spirit of the requirements laid out in Washington's Clean Energy Transformation Act. So those things that are valued by Washington customers, but don't necessarily get directly captured in the price scoring. It's worthy to note that previously in PacifiCorp's system-wide RFPs, we have not been able to incorporate or align these elements into our bid evaluations to the extent that we will be able to in this Washington Citus RFP. Please note also that in the non-price scoring, we're not attempting to assign a dollar value to the impact provided by each one of these non-price elements. We're simply including the non-price scoring elements in a way that definitely does impact the final score, but we're not saying it's worth a particular dollar amount. As Sarah mentioned, to facilitate the non-price scoring, a questionnaire was developed, which bidders will be required to submit. The questionnaire has 19 questions that cover a range of CBI and energy justice elements that are important to Washington customers. After we developed the questionnaire, we presented and solicited feedback from and received over 20 comments back from Energy Advisory Group, from the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission staff, from Northwest Energy Coalition, and from developers. After consideration and input from a number of internal PacifiCorp teams, we pulled together a table that summarizes all these. That's the matrix that Sarah referred to. And that matrix, this slide here says that it was sent out as a pre-read, just a correction. That's available upon request if anyone would like to see that. But we have provided just to the right here a sample of 3 questions from those 20 comments that we got back that kind of show that we did take into consideration the feedback and did modify the non-price questionnaire based on that feedback. Next slide, please. So this is just wanted to give you kind of a very high level view of how we intend to combine the price and non-price scoring to arrive at a final score for each bid. I want to call out that, as the slide says here, this is indicative. That means it's, still a work in process. We're still refining it, but this just gives you a kind of a high level a view of how we intend to combine these price and non-price scoring elements. As Sarah mentioned, the non-price score elements are going to be weighted 20%, and the price scores are weighted at 80%. And if you can look at the maximum score column there, you can see that the non-price score has 20, price score has 80 for a total of 100. And so the way this works is the 19 questions, the bidders provide answers to those 19 questions. Each answer receives a 0 or a 1. We tally up those answers and then convert that total into a non-price score, 20 being the maximum non-price score that a bid can receive. So if you look in this example that we have on screen here in the non-price score line, bid number 8 answered all 19 questions in a manner that they received a 1 for each question. And so they got the highest non-price score of 20. Then the price score is actually generated by PacifiCorp's portfolio optimization model. It's a big computer that we throw all this data into that Samuel has far more insight than I do into. But it's what's going to generate the price score based on all those direct economic elements that impact the bid. So in this example we're looking at here on screen, the Plexos model will produce a price score with the maximum price score being 80. And those are combined together then, the non-price and the price scores are combined together to result in a total score. So if you look at in the gold box here, bid number 5, you can see on this one, the price score, they got a ranking of a number 1 ranking. So they had the lowest cost bid. Their price score is 80 in that example. But in their non-price scoring questionnaire, they didn't do so well. So they got a non-price score of 11. So that pulled their number 1 ranking down to a number 2 ranking if you look at the very bottom line for bid number 5. So this just kind of is illustrative of the fact that the non-price score definitely will impact the final scoring to the tune of 20%. Are there any questions at this point?
Thank you, Ivers. I'm not seeing any immediately, but I'm gonna give it a moment to let people digest the information shared. And again, just a big shout out to those on the line and those not on the line who provided the feedback to Ivers and team. Couldn't do it without you. But I think with me rambling enough and saying those thank yous, I feel safe to say no hands raised and nothing in the chat for you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I second that again. We do appreciate all the feedback from the various stakeholder groups to help refine this questionnaire. I think that's my last slide. So.
All righty. Well, thank you so much. We'll go to the next slide. Thank you, Zanaya. And we'll open it up for public comment. I know a lot of information was shared today. This public comment period is both for items that are a follow-up from items presented earlier in the meeting, but also just more broadly, anything that you would like for Pacific Core to hear. So why don't we give it a minute to see if we hear anything. Alrighty, and not your last chance at feedback. As I mentioned at the beginning of the call, we would appreciate anybody who stays on the line to help and fill out our post-engagement survey. But I'll hand it over to Kimberly to close us out.
Thank you, Morgan. Could we please go to the next slide? So quickly, just want to help close us out by reiterating that there are opportunities both within this space and other spaces for folks to tune in, engage with us, provide their thoughts, and or just learn about other efforts. So quickly wanted to share that on August 26th, we will be convening as many individuals as possible to discuss the draft 2025 Clean Energy Implementation Plan. So we are working on delivering that to you all in a timely manner. For folks that need meeting information, it is included here and at the bottom left within the Clean Energy Transformation Act webpage. For folks that have questions, concerns, comments, please do email us. We do monitor the email to keep up to date with any new communications and or if folks are just interested in being added to our distribution list. On the right-hand side, we do have an upcoming Equity Advisory Group meeting, and I think this doesn't necessarily reflect July, but just know that there is a meeting in July. I believe it will be hybrid, so there will be individuals convening in person as well as online. We do encourage folks to tune in if you want to listen in that space and see what the discussions reflect and sort of the thoughts and perspectives of our community members more specifically. And then just here at the bottom right, some additional resources, including our CEIP feedback tracker that's made available online, as well as our Energy Resource Center. So this is specific to Washington and really has a host of good resources and information, both for folks engaged in this area and or potentially a way to connect others in community with important information and support. So just wanted to point this out. I do recognize we're a little ahead of schedule, so do love to give folks time back, and I do want to quickly add that we do appreciate your time today. I know time is a gift, so very happy to see folks engaging with us and asking these important questions. And with that, Morgan, I will let you close us out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. And I echo that. Time and feedback is a generous gift from you all, so we don't take it lightly. I know in working with the Pacific Core folks, they're really committed to hearing and providing these opportunities. But without further ado, I'm going to launch that post-engagement survey that I mentioned earlier. As a reminder, it's a quick survey, and it is anonymously submitted to Pacific Power. So your feedback is appreciated, and we look forward to engaging with you all in the future. And happy to give you some time back. Go enjoy the rest of your morning.